Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hello, Otterites. This is episode 161.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis, sitting in the captain's chair. The choppers are incoming, guys. Let's make it
You're
to
in the
landing
pilot
point.
seat in the chopper.
On the pilot seat. Okay, that's right. Dangerous Dan. That was one of the.
Yes.
That was one of the guys in there. MASH, the TV series in particular. We'll talk a little bit about the genesis and why it's not just the TV series. It was a little bit more than that. But ultimately, that's
nobody remembers the movie.
Nobody. No, that's just a little backstory.
It is good.
It is. The movie was excellent. We'll talk a teensy bit about that. And the book series was okay, actually. And it was a series of books. Believe it or not, not just the first one. Richard Hooker. Richard Hooker.
Did he write all of them?
He did. I think he had some help on some of the later ones. He wrote the first one was MASH, and then MASH Goes to Maine, which ironically, after MASH was a thing after the TV series ended. Most of the book series was that stuff. It was these same goofy surgeons back in civilian life. Only the first book was about the Korean War.
But that's, I didn't even know there were.
Yeah, there were. I had several of them at one time back in the day. They were moderate bestsellers.
Right, but he didn't make it a series of books until after it had been a success on screen.
No, he wrote more of them after that. A lot of them were written after that with the same characters, but he had at least the first two were already written before, because he sold the rights and.
Every author's dream.
That's right. And the movie got made. Robert Altman, in 1970, the movie MASH, which was based loosely on the first book. And it was with... It's really worth your watch if you haven't seen it, folks, because it's actually a very, very good... It's hilarious in many ways. It also was not constrained by television, because it's rated R, baby. You know, Sally Kellerman gets...
The recently passed Sally
Kellerman shows her wonderful assets in the shower scene. Couldn't do that on television.
No. Yeah. She appears as Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan.
That's correct.
Chief nurse of the
4077th MASH. Most of it was the same. The characters were not all. Tom Skerritt played a character in the movie Duke Forrest, who is a Southern Georgia racist in many ways, who kind of brings that with him into that. That was deemed at the time not palatable for the right reason. Not that Tom Skerritt didn't do a good job with it, he did, but that was just one of the characters. They wrote him out. They decided we're not going to do any of that. Whereas they kind of gave more space to the nefarious, villainous frenemy character of Frank Burns, who was played by Robert Duvall, actually, in the movie. The only thing he does is basically... he is a religious zealot who is hard to get along with, and he, as he says, he nails Hot Lips, and they punches Hawkeye when he kind of jibes him about it and gets sent home for being insane. They put him away in a straitjacket. You see him turn away, and Tom Skerritt says, fair is fair, Colonel. If I nail Hot Lips and punch Hawkeye, can I go home too? So that's just one of those. Well, actually, he and Hot Lips do have a thing later.
The film is almost unconnected. Like it's almost like a series of vignettes.
It very much is.
It is Hawkeye Pierce.
That's correct. Who's Donald Sutherland.
And Elliot Gould is Trapper John.
Along with Tom Skerritt.
And then again. Blake, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake is the boss.
Roger Bowen is the actor. It's kind of a shame because, not that he did a bad job with it, but that character would be so much more with McLean Stevenson in the TV series. Yeah. It was almost like a side. He was almost a joke. Well, he was a joke, but it really didn't do that much. Yeah. They had a whole football team scene at the end, which was a blast. Absolutely a blast. The movie, it did okay.
Yes.
It did okay. And they wanted to make
Gary
a sequel.
Berghoff was still Radar.
Gary Berghoff.
He's the only one
and that was his first role. And he played Radar, the company clerk, and successfully made the transference over to the series. He's the only one that came over from that. Although most of the characters and the situation was pretty much the same. Although at the end of the movie, both Trapper and Hawkeye go home.
Right. The film series kind of starts everything over.
Because, wanted to make
Frank Burns is there. in the movie he's sent home as a lunatic.
Yep.
And
they originally wanted to make a sequel to that movie based on Hooker's second book, MASH Goes to Maine, but it's back in Maine. It's back in, and they said that's not the story. Right. I mean, you could do that. That's about these characters, and hey, that's okay. That's not what we want. So that kind of fell to the side, and people saw, well, why don't we make a TV series about this? And Larry Gelbart is who was the
Larry Gelbart's really the creator, the guy who adapted the book/film into a television show.
Exactly. Very little of Hooker's material makes it into the TV series.
And again, it's not sanitized.
But if you read the books and you watch some of the early episodes, first couple 3 years, they're picking and they'll have a little tweak here, a little tweak there to something that happened. There's a moment they talk about it. They don't mention it in the movie, but they do mention it in the series about the deluge, which is they have an enormous amount. It seems like if you watch the show week to week, you've constantly, every few episodes, you've got thousands of choppers coming in. It really wasn't like that. But there were times where they just wouldn't stop. And these guys, they talk about meatball surgery, and they're on their feet for hours. That really did happen.
Yeah.
Not often, but it did happen.
There is a kernel of this that is real. It is, Korea is that moment of, well, you know what? We've realized that if we can treat people sooner,
yes,
if we can treat people close to the point of the battle, we can save lives.
That's right.
And so that really was a thing to take the hospital and try to get it really, really close to the front.
Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, that's what it means.
And then
that's
you
what
combine the relatively new thing of a helicopter could really pick up people very close to the fighting and bring them to these
surgical hospitals.
To these hospitals that were, again, constructed out of tents in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
So it is a thing that Hooker's adapting.
And he was there. I mean, I haven't mentioned that, but he was a veteran. I mean, a lot of these stories are his stories.
Yes.
They really did happen.
Yes.
He's adapting them into a really coherent narrative.
Yeah.
But he is Hawkeye Pierce in many respects.
Yeah. So the show is 1972, though.
That's right.
Portraying 1950 to 53 in Korea. So it was clear after a while that this was a show set in Korea, but really about Vietnam.
Yeah, in fact, in the finale, they talk about there's a mention of Vien Bien Phu in Vietnam over the radio, and Jamie Farr deliberately says, they say this is such and such in Vietnam, and he says to the camera, so where is Vietnam? Of course, this is in '83, which by that time the war's been over for not quite a decade, but close.
Well, technically, the war was over for 10 years in 1970. From 1973 was when we got out.
Yeah.
No, we didn't leave the country until 1975.
Right.
But the war was over for us.
So you're right. There's a wink, wink, shake, shake that this is going on.
It's going to happen all over again.
Right.
And it became an anti-war statement.
Oh yes,
on a very conservative medium of television in the U.S.
Yeah, it was very much. This is if you want to give it a flaw. The one thing that MASH did, which it can't help but do, I get that, is that it was very much 1970s morals and
social commentary.
On something that happened 20 years earlier or more.
Right, yeah, and there, you can see some of that. If you watch the series in its entirety, there's a great change that goes along the way.
It generally accepted it when it became kind of Alan Alda became the creative force.
Yeah,
it was termed preachy.
Yes,
yes,
but you're right. I mean, it is a document of something that happened in 1950 and 52 with the sensibility and experience and hindsight of 1982.
Right.
Which doesn't always work.
No.
But much of the show lasted 11 years, which was a long time in the 70s. I mean, yes, you've had Gunsmoke that was still on when it premiered. That ran 30 seasons.
Even to this point, 11 seasons of a sitcom is a lot.
That's correct. Sitcom. It is. And they kept it fresh, ironically, because the cast would change. And that should have been the death knell. When you had your two of your main 3 years 3 years of pretty much essentially the same cast, and
Yes.
2 of your 3 main characters decide they want to leave at the same time.
Right. 1974, McLean Stevenson and Wayne Rogers decided to both leave the show. And at that time, you're right. That was thought of if the cast leaves, the show's dead.
That's right.
So it really was a pioneering thing to, well, no, let's just replace them and keep going.
That's right. Yeah, we write the
Well,
characters
Doctor
out.
Who did it better.
Yeah, well, it proved it could be done.
Yes.
And,
But it was
right.
very unusual on American television
Yeah.
to change the cast of a show.
Yeah,
In those first 3 years, we're still more of an ensemble cast.
Yes.
it was. I mean, yes,
it did not,
Alan
had not
Alda
yet
was.
become the Hawkeye show.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Alan
Yes.
Alda was still a star. And if he had left, you're right. It may have had a different thing that would have happened. However, they went and brought in Harry
Well,
Morgan.
hold on.
Oh,
Before-
sorry.
Before we talk about that, so there are 2 distinct eras. So there is the Blake
Era.
show,
Henry
Yeah.
Blake era, yeah.
and then there's the Colonel Potter era.
Yes, that's yeah.
So they're not entirely 2 different shows, but in that transition, the first 3 years are pretty much total comedy.
Mm-hmm.
It is comedy only. They
And
changed,
to a large degree, like almost a slapstick style comedy.
Yes, very much. When they change it, when in the last episode of the 3rd season,
Yes.
when Blake's plane goes down,
Mm-hmm.
it is the first death of a major character, of a lead character on any show,
Mm-hmm.
and they handle it right there on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, they don't show him die because his plane goes down
Over the Sea of
ocean,
Japan. Yeah.
Sea of Japan, and Radar comes in and makes the announcement. He's visibly shaken. Phenomenal acting in that scene, but that scene from that point on, they became a dramedy.
Yes.
And that's when they started dealing with more serious issues.
Mm-hmm.
Now, poor Trapper John, he didn't get any kind of send off. He's just
written out. Yeah, he just went home. In fact, he was there in that last episode, and the next episode for the next season, Hawkeye has gone to Japan, and he's just
Right, he's on leave.
He's on leave, and boom, he's gone, and he comes back, and B.G. Honeycutt is there.
Well, no.
He had to pick up Honeycutt.
Had to go. So
That's
what
right.
happens is he gets back from his furlough like a couple hours after Trapper had to leave. It's like, you got to go.
Yeah.
Your plane is leaving. You've got to leave now. So Radar and Hawkeye commandeer a Jeep,
Yeah.
and they go after Trapper so that Hawkeye can say goodbye. I mean, it's his best friend.
That's right.
And so they don't get there. His plane takes off before they get there. So while they're there, they decide to pick. They pick up Honeycutt, BJ, who is named after his father or his mother B and his father J.
Yes, X. I was wondering if that was going to
Yes,
come up. That's
yes,
right.
yeah.
It was a brilliant scene because even though the storylines often got seriouser, they still had plenty of comedy.
Oh, they did. It was just it's almost 2 distinct shows in the approach.
Mm-hmm.
Once those 2 guys left, and it's not because those 2 guys left. It's like it was holding it back from being able to do serious. But once they did that serious scene at the end, they realized, maybe we can do more.
We can stretch this a little bit. And so they deliberately made the characters of Henry Blake and Sherman Potter very, very different.
Yes.
You did not make fun of Sherman Potter.
No. Well, you did once.
I mean,
When they're doing the practical jokes and they put the black stuff on the binoculars, so he's got the rings around his eyes.
Yeah, and he could be a figure of fun occasionally, like the time Frank gets in the tank and runs over the Jeep, and he's an old World War I cavalryman, so he pulls out his pistol and shoots the Jeep, because it's dead. So,
but
every once in a while you see
it was
those.
a very different way of doing comedy from what they did with Henry Blake. Henry Blake was everybody's favorite clown.
But that's correct. Often a buffoon at times.
Yes,
Well,
but he was the lovable clown.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, he was a colonel, just not. He wasn't a lifelong career army guy, which doesn't make sense for him to be the colonel because of that. He would have just been one of the other doctors.
Yeah, and he just happened to be the guy that was there.
Yeah, so he was not Army. I mean, he was obviously a colonel, but he was not Army. I mean, he was always wearing his fishing hat.
Yeah.
And, whereas Potter, he wore his uniform.
Well, when Potter comes on that very first episode where he comes in and Radar's sunbathing there, he says, we'd like to, here comes full Colonel Sherman T. Potter, regular Army, God save us all, which was intended to be, and he honked.
What are we going to do about these?
That's right. He honks the horn, and Radar tells him, "Shove that horn in your ear." And he looks up, and he's sitting there sunbathing, and he realizes, "Wake up, son! I'm Colonel Potter." "Oh, yes, sir. Permission to cover my naked identity, sir." It takes off from there, and it was really, Klinger and later after Radar leaves, which was its own thing, by the way.
Yes.
It got even more serious. I think that was, every time they'd have a major cast change, things would go a little bit further. When Larry Linville leaves, all of a sudden you've got
right, he only stayed one more season.
Yeah, and then you've got
Charles Emerson Winchester
the third, with his sister
David
Honoria.
Ogden
No, that's Honoria.
Honoria.
Yes, that's right. David Ogden Stiers, who does not talk with that type of an accent, Malin. If you ever hear him, he's just a regular
he's
guy.
Phenomenal, though.
Phenomenal actor. He really, really is. And he makes it his own. He becomes another antagonist, but it's totally different. Yeah. And because
it's an antagonist. Yeah, he, instead of the psycho, basically the lunatic that
in a joke. Frank Burns is a joke. Yeah.
He's I don't belong here. I'm a real surgeon.
That's right.
And
he is, in many respects, the best surgeon there. But he thinks so. That's for darn sure.
Well, he thinks so.
That's right. And at times he is. And at other times he realizes just how out of his depth he really is. I remember the episode, you all probably do too, where he scratches his nose and Margaret Houlihan catches him at it.
Yes, he touched his nose.
You touched your nose! And he refuses to do that. And there's so many wonderful episodes that they had. Yeah. That because it was Monday nights at 9:00, it was must-see TV long before the term was ever invented, and ironically, it was running in reruns while it's still on.
Yes, it was,
because it was around. You could watch it twice a day on Mondays in the early '80s.
That's common.
Yeah,
Big Bang was running in reruns long before it finished.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
of course, that went 12 years.
Right, and this but. This was, you didn't do much of that, but every afternoon, you're at 5 o'clock during the syndicated hour, you're watching MASH.
Yeah.
And new episodes coming out on Monday nights.
So, one of the interesting things about MASH is it had the opportunity for guest stars.
Yes.
But you know what? It wasn't a focus. Occasionally you'd have somebody come through, but for the most part, you didn't have, just about any other show would have had big guest stars come through as one of the, as a general or something, or one of the soldiers that they're treating, and there wasn't really a whole lot of that.
Mm-hmm. No,
which is interesting because the show was made for that kind of stuff, and they didn't do it. This show stood entirely on the merits of the cast and the writing, obviously.
They would have a few reoccurring guest stars. Alan Arbus was in there as Sidney.
Yes, he was phenomenal.
Yeah, he was very, very good, and I cannot remember the actor's name who played Colonel Flagg, who was he was the tight ass.
He thought that there were communists everywhere, and
that's right.
He was the paranoid.
Yeah, every once in a while you get those throwbacks to the 50s to try to make it fit. Oh yeah, that's right. We are in the 50s here, so that you get a little bit of that. They were very careful not to. They always mention if they're talking about the president, they're talking about either Truman or Eisenhower and things like that. And
talking about Potter, that actor actually appeared in a season 2 or season 3 episode. He played a general.
Yeah, Harry Morgan. Yeah, as a lunatic. He becomes comes in and he goes nuts. And apparently they had a good experience with the actor. Harry Morgan is apparently the really nice guy.
Yes,
and he really had a career revision of that. He had been in Dragnet before and had done a few things, but he was an older guy at the time. And
much more believable as a colonel.
Very much so. He comes out. He's a very lovable guy. Particularly he and Klinger in later episodes after Radar goes on, they have this back and forth between them all the time. And
because Klinger, he was scared to death of Potter at first because obviously Klinger's trying to get out of the army by wearing dresses.
Yeah, which was, Jamie Farr made a shtick of it, and he did a very good job with it. it kind of haunted him later in life in many respects. But it was also just strange enough that he would get a lot of the interview shows because it was, what do you mean you're running around in a dress all the time?
Right.
And it's just they change. Of course, he does away with that in the later episodes and becomes actually a pretty sympathetic character. And Jimmy Farr's a great actor, but that's just how the show evolved.
Well, and that's the thing where I want to go is that the reason it lasted 11 years is not because they started to become real preachy in the later years. They did it because the characters had growth.
That's right. You're exactly right.
Hawkeye,
which was unheard of at the time.
Really, Hawkeye didn't have a whole lot of growth because he was the anchor, so to speak.
Yeah.
The only growth you might say that he had is that he and Hot Lips became semi-friends. Although they did have that one dalliance out in the field.
They did, that's right. And they tried it, realized it wouldn't work, but they did it so well because it was
their relationship was forever changed. It's not like they went back to the status quo.
They began to respect each other.
That's
the characters
right.
began to respect each other.
And of course, that with Larry Linville departing, and next thing you know, Margaret Houlihan has to actually be a character that's not defined as the sidekick of the antagonist.
Right.
She actually, and of course, she gets engaged right at that time.
Well, no, she's engaged before. She gets married before Larry Linville leaves.
Well, yeah, she gets engaged before he does.
No, I think she gets married.
And then he... because that's what it's when he gets...
The breakup sends him over the edge.
The breakup sends him over the edge, exactly. And I want to say, I don't remember if she was married before, and I think you're right, she did get married. And it's right after that is when he leaves.
Yeah.
Because he goes nuts. And gets sent home, and of course Hawkeye is just pissed because it goes back to that original movie in that book. Hey, if I punch Hot Lips and if I nail Hot Lips and punch Hawkeye, can I go home?
Yeah.
It's kind of that same thing.
Yeah. Now, early on in the first couple of seasons, there was a black character,
Spear Chucker Jones.
Spear Chucker. I was trying to remember what the racist name was that they called
it. Was
carried over from the movie.
Yes. And it was Fred Williamson played him.
He was a good actor.
He's a fine actor, that's right. And I don't remember the actor, Tim Brown, I think was his name, who played him just for a few episodes in that first season. I don't think he was not there for very long.
Yeah, it's obviously you never get away with.
Well, it was a terrible racist stereotype. Although the actors and the characters took it in stride.
Well, the name was, but and this is what is so often true, which I think is the best way to handle these kinds of things. Even though the name was awful, he was never treated differently.
No. He was
from anybody else.
He was another surgeon, just like the rest of them. In fact, he was in the movie. He's a neurosurgeon. They bring him in because of that talent. He just happened to have played pro ball for a while, which explain that one to me. How do you but they talk about why you have that name. He said, "Well, I used to throw the javelin." So they try to mitigate that terribly racist name.
Because that was the idea when in the film, when they found out they were going to be in this football game and bet against this other
the evac hospital, which has
they
5 times the manpower.
Yeah, they had their own ringer, so they said, "Well, then we're going to request neurosurgeon Oliver
Harmon Jones.
Oliver Harmon Jones." Right. Also known as Spear Chucker.
Oh, he's a good ball player. That's right. Yeah, he's played for the 49ers. Yeah, that's right. So, which is it's kind of cool. It's really just a one-off, and they kind of brought it forward. But you're right. Yeah. There's not much of that otherwise.
Right. Which realistically, I would prefer to see it handled that way because I think that goes farther towards normalizing relations than anything else. Because if you keep making a big deal out of it. Well, yes, it's important to not forget how bad things could be.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to show how good they could be.
Well, it's very true. A black neurosurgeon in 1952.
Right. I mean, it's not impossible, and I'm sure there were some.
But and I think Spear Chucker was created on a real character. Pretty sure he's in the books, and that's Hooker bringing that forward.
Right. But things like we talked about in the last episode, Deborah Messing for a little bit is a great follow-on for Lucille Ball. And we just mentioned that she was on Will and Grace. And one of the things that helped normalize the acceptance of homosexuals to be out and to be just, we're here, big deal. And then to help move that needle on that spectrum was that show.
It was, yes.
Because they didn't make a big deal about the fact that Will was homosexual. He was a gay man. I mean, they didn't hide it, but it was just part of the character. It was, and yes, he went on dates, and of course they had Jack, who was the stereotypical gay man. But
the gags, the most of the humor though was not based on that. It was just based on the two of them getting along.
Right. Now with Karen and Jack, that's probably the only stereotypical gay, if you can call it stereotypical gay humor, came up, because Jack was very flamboyant, and Karen, the characters just fed off each other so well. They were a great pair, comedic-wise. I do admit that just the two of them were very funny. But they treated it as just, it's normal. And I think you see more of that nowadays when you have what are considered marginalized groups. So you look at Star Trek Discovery. Mm-hmm. That is probably the quintessential, let's make a point of every marginalized type of person possible and making them key figures in the show. So that, there's not... So that's the majority of the characters. Mm-hmm. And, they just make it as, well, this is just normal. They don't make a big deal about it. Although they do present the romantic relationships pretty... I don't want to say heavily, but I mean, they don't hide that sort of thing. So, MASH dealing with the Spear Chucker character, even though it was brief, I think was a groundbreaking sort of thing. And it's too bad they didn't keep him as a character, because I think that was one of the great things about him, is that he was just one of the guys. Mm-hmm. When you get to Archie Bunker and All in the Family, race is still very much a part of that. Right, whereas in MASH it was not. And they were contemporary with each other. Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting the different approach, but I like the way it was done there. And maybe that's unrealistic of me, just as unrealistic of the show to handle it that way. It was ahead of its time, that's for sure. It was definitely ahead of its time. But they covered a lot of things that way. They did mental illness in the final episode. Very much so, and that's that was a very powerful episode. It was, yeah, and there's some things I didn't like about it, but honestly, that was a very disturbing event that caused Hawkeye's break. It was very much so, and they did not shy away from shocking events. They've had those things before, where people would, because this is war, folks. Characters would come and they would die, and you'd have guys dying on the operating table, and that was not uncommon. Right. Matter of fact, one of the great episodes involved that. So, BJ and Father McCahey, which is another great character we hadn't even mentioned him yet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Hot Lips, Margaret, they're working on a guy who came in. Yeah. And it's Christmas. That's right. Oh, yeah. It's they did several Christmas episodes. That's one of the best ones. They find out, because they find a picture of the guy's family in his uniform, and they're trying to keep the guy alive because BJ doesn't want this guy's kids to think of Christmas as the day their daddy died. Right, and it was brilliant because they know they cannot save him. They know he will die. Right, but so they can work hard to prolong his life just to make the death date, because it's not on the 26th. And they don't make it. They don't make it. Yeah. So they end up moving the clock hand to 12:05. That's right. And they make a big deal about, I've never falsified records before, as Hot Lips says, and because they're trying to make it easier on those kids. That was a very good, well acted episode. Very much so. Yeah. It's another example of how it became a dramedy. Oh yeah. Well, there's all in the same episode. The drama and the comedy all happened in the same episode. Because you've got your A theme and your B theme, stories that may be going on in given times here. There's another episode that's very powerful where they have a young man that they catch, and they have to hold his. They only have so long before he bleeds out, so they literally have to physically hold his arteries shut until they can get the thing. I remember. And they have a clock that goes on at the bottom of the screen. Because we've got this much time before brain damage happens. We have to be able to get him from the landing pad into here and get this done. All the while, I think it's BJ, but it might be Hawkeye, that's literally holding the guy's artery closed. Going to do an arterial graft or something. Right. Exactly. So a lot and there's also another very, very good episode that used some comedy for a dramatic theme of
Southern soldier comes in
Yeah.
and he requests if he needs a blood transfusion,
Not from a black
it
person.
has to be only white blood.
Yeah.
So when he's unconscious, they darken his skin with shoe polish.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
I forgot about it. So they did treat that.
and tease him and saying, "Well, you're the one that requested watermelon and fried chicken."
Right.
You know.
You could get away with that now. That's just absolutely,
Well,
But they-
I don't know. They wouldn't do it now because I don't think there's as much of a need for that.
Yeah.
But you're right. They use comedy to handle a very serious situation.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think they did that better than the normal stuff they did on All in the Family with Archie Bunker's inherent
Yeah.
discomfort.
yeah.
Because Archie also had to have a transfusion, and he got it from a black woman, and but they didn't do any comedy with that.
Yeah.
And I almost think that the MASH version is more powerful because they show how ludicrous the man's position
That's
is.
right.
Well,
And they
it really-
ridicule him very effectively.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really show the pointlessness of that
Yeah.
attitude.
I'd forgotten about that, so maybe that's a little bit of making up for getting rid of the Spear Chucker Jones character. But yeah, and that's some social commentary, and they never would have done that in the 50s.
No.
I mean, those doctors would have been they would have gone to Leavenworth if they'd actually done something like that, and it would have been very unethical to do anyways. But,
Yeah.
but it's great comedy and great social commentary.
Oh yeah, and there was a
was
lot
well
of
done.
that. There was a lot of that from time to time, and you're right. Towards the latter part, I think some of it they got very preachy at times, but some of it was they were running out of steam.
They were. They did a 3-year war in 11 years.
That's right. Yeah. And they you just kind of get that. Well, when you have to resort to some of that, it lost a lot of the magic, and they realized, okay, we'll get another year out of it and call it a day, or there's a couple things we want to do. Or how are we going to land this plane? Because they did think a long time. MASH it becomes such a, I don't want to say a phenomenon, but it was so well known. Like I said, because by this time it's heavily into syndication. And everybody is showing it, so it grew exponentially in many respects. Its fan base did because you could see it more often.
Yes,
and especially when you see it every day instead of once a week, and you can see all of them, and wow, this is really something. So
in Michigan, whatever channel it has, Channel 50, I think it was, they were showing 2 episodes back to back every day.
Oh yeah, exactly, because it was inexpensive. They could do that, and it helped create this mystique. So by the time you decide to end it in '83. What are we going to do? So they come up with the 2-hour finale, goodbye, farewell, and amen, where they actually leave, where the war ends. They flirted with that in a couple of episodes before. They thought it ended, but it didn't, and stuff like that. That was kind of early. And they gave each, because you got 2 hours, they gave each character, which by this time are household names. Everybody knows the characters, and every one of them has their own sub-story that goes through, and some of them are very life-changing, and some of them are dramatic, but not exceptionally. I mean, Father Mulcahy gets deafened by an exploding shell, and that's that's just something that happens to him. Klinger ends up staying. Yeah, which is there's an irony for you because he falls in love with a.
Well, it's not because he falls in love with Soon Lee. He stays to help her find her parents.
Right.
Her father.
Exactly. Yeah.
So he's staying for that. And honestly, I don't know that the U.S. Army would have let him do that. He might have had to have come back on his own.
Yeah, but, they end up, when they did the Aftermath show.
Yeah, he was on that.
He was on that.
Yeah, so apparently they found the father really quick and went back to the U.S.
Yeah, and some of them, Margaret did not, I don't even recall what her story was in that. Of course, she and Alan Alda were the only 2 characters
No, Klinger was on the show.
Yeah, but he came in late though, and he was not a regular at first.
Right,
He was a guest player for a while.
Yeah, there were 4 characters that were part of the show the entire run.
Yeah,
Pierce and Houlihan are the only characters that were center stage characters.
Starring roles.
Klinger and Mulcahy are occasional players.
They're bit players for the first 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
and then eventually they become starring.
Yeah, but they're there from the beginning.
Yeah,
they are,
and then they come
right.
in as regulars after, where Jamie Farr eventually would, he would appear pretty much in every episode after Gary Burghoff.
Well, yeah, because he took over the company clerk job from Radar.
Yeah, so you had a lot of that. That they all had. Winchester's role was really he creates a band, a classical music band with North Korean prisoners who get sent off, and then he ends up treating them dead. He sees their corpses come back
Right.
at the end. But this man is not a fighter; he's a musician, and that sort of thing. And it was, ironically, that was probably one of the least dramatic of what went on, and yet that's the one I remember the most. Other than, of course, Hawkeye's. Of course, as the star, he gets the biggest role, and he goes crazy. He literally goes. He has a mental breakdown because of.
Really, what we call now, it would be a PTSD experience from what he believes he caused, which he kind of did when they figured out what happened.
Right. Yeah.
Because you don't know, because you kept doing flashbacks to that time on the bus.
Right, and you don't know exactly what happens. It's very good storytelling because you don't.
It is.
You don't know
did not
exactly
see
what
that
happens until at one point he has the breakdown and he admits to Alan Arbus, Sidney, the psychiatrist, because I told that woman to quiet what I thought was a chicken, she smothered her baby, and he realized it because they were, in danger of a North Korean patrol, and it was well done. It was very well done, and yet it also was perfectly concluded because BJ would not say goodbye.
But he did it at the
but
end.
He did at the
of.
end by making the stones saying goodbye, and that's as they leave. So
Yeah.
that let the audience say goodbye, which was kind of the whole point.
Yeah.
To make that.
Yeah, honestly, the whole him going crazy thing, I didn't really care for that aspect of the. Never mind the story, because the thing with the baby, that was very disturbing, but it was just so out of the ordinary.
Well, they wanted.
It's almost like doing the holodeck thing with the on the last episode of Enterprise. This is just.
Yeah.
First of all, that was a TNG episode, really, but
Right. They they wanted to do something shocking.
Right.
And that's what they kind of came up with. Okay, I get that's what you want to do. Otherwise, it's got to be memorable. Otherwise, because it's not going to be just another episode. It's got to be different in many ways. So it was the most watched scripted TV series episode ever until like 2010.
Something like
I
that.
was just looking it up. I don't know. I didn't get a chance of what beat it. But it was powerful, and it was one of those things, especially when you're talking just 3 networks at this time. The whole nation tuned in and watched that.
Even if you were not a regular viewer, you would have watched that.
That's correct. And nobody. It was bigger than the Super Bowls were at the time because everybody watched it, and it was
something like 83 million people.
That's right. And it was the whole family tuned in to watch that.
Yeah,
and I remember watching it.
Yeah, and you have to
everybody
remember,
watched it.
Relative to the population of the country at the time, that was almost fully a third of all people, including children, in the entire country, watched that show. So basically, you're talking about every adult.
Yeah,
practically every adult watched that show. I mean, obviously, there are going to be some kids, teenagers and what have you, and younger ones that are forced to watch it. Because back then, you probably only had one, if you're lucky, 2 televisions. Not one in every room like we do now.
And this was a Sunday night too, which was a primetime family viewing. Which they had moved it to for that event because that's when at this time in the late 70s, early 80s, that's when your event programming took place.
Yeah.
If you're going to have your mini series, Roots was the first, but there are others. Your premiere was Sunday night.
Yep.
And if you hook them that night, you got them for the rest of the week. And that's kind of how a lot of that worked. And the model worked pretty well because we still talk about this show. It's shown in syndication everywhere. So many of us can recall those great moments. We just kind of laid out really everything that the show did, and it still lasts. It's still.
Well, I don't think we laid out everything the show did. We
barely
scratched
we had
the
11.
surface.
The cast changes and the movements from year to year. That's what I'm talking about here. With regards to the individual episodes, you got a favorite, guys, that we haven't already talked about?
Oh, there's so many good ones early on, especially because I was not a fan of the Honeycutt character all that much. Because it seemed like when you add that to Hawkeye, then you just got 2 preachers. But there's so much that was funny and really good in those first 3 seasons.
Yeah,
and a lot of people have come back to that is one of the golden ages of comedy. I think McLean Stevenson was. He admitted it himself. He was a fool to have left. He really was because his career. He went on to headline several comedy shows after that. That all just kind of tanked.
Right.
He was a good comedic actor. And he in the 70s he was pretty well known, but it was Henry Blake that did it. He could never come back to that, and which is a shame because, like I say, he was a very good actor. And he always kicked himself after. He says, I wished I'd have stayed.
He should have stayed. He should have stayed on there. It would have been really good. There was an episode, of course, where they call Chicago to get ribs.
Adam's ribs.
Yes,
that's
Adam's
right.
ribs. That's one that's very memorable that most fans of the show know. Where they got ribs and coleslaw from Chicago, shipped all the way to Korea.
That's right. And they sit down just in time to eat it. Of course, the choppers come in. And I never will forget they're getting ready to eat, and Hawkeye says something to praise the Lord, pass the sauce. And I'm thinking, that's the quintessential short grace that you can use. And occasionally that slips out for me that I will use from time to time.
Yeah. I don't know that I can. Gosh, I don't know that I can pick a favorite episode. I guess one of the ones that stands out is the Hawkeye Hot Lips getting together episode when they are out there. It's a little kitschy and somewhat unbelievable, but I liked it because of the change in the characters towards each other. I thought it was great growth of the characters. Gosh, there was just so many that were just so much fun. I didn't care for the Charles character as much, but one of the interesting things about the characters on the shows, on the show, is that they did not have duplicates. You said you used to have two preachers when BJ came on, but you know what? That's not entirely true because BJ and Hawkeye are very different from each other. Hawkeye is the hound dog.
Yeah, the clown, the hound dog.
Yeah, and he's the single guy. He's the guy that's trying desperately to get home, yet he's the one who stays there the entire war. Everybody else rotates home, except him. And whereas BJ, he's the family man. He's got a wife and kids at home. Charles, of course, is the snooty surgeon.
Yeah. In a way, Charles's character is more sustainable than the Frank Burns character.
That's correct, because Frank could never change. Yeah. And Larry Lindwood was a fine actor who he could sense that Frank's never going to go anywhere. That's one of the reasons he left, and he never regretted his decision to do so.
Well, once they separated him and Hot Lips, it was very difficult for him to be a good character.
Yeah,
because they worked better as a pair,
and they had run the mileage out of that pairing.
Oh yeah,
I don't know that. I think they could have done more.
They thought that they had.
They ran the mileage out of the Frank Burns being a lunatic kind of character. I mean, there's a reason he's written out so early in the film. There's only so much you can do with this guy. So anyway, Francis, here we've kept going, and we haven't let you be the captain and call for a bourbon break.
We have to call for a bourbon break before we wrap this bad boy up.
Oh, geez, I'm out.
Oh my good. Well, the bottle, Mr. Howard, it stands by us somewhere here. Anyway.
You took all of them back over there, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, pour yourself a quick snort of something.
Yeah.
From
While you're pouring, we'll be talking. What do you got, Martin?
I poured one last little snort of Woodford Reserve.
Oh, really?
So I've had real variants here while we recorded here at Steel. And
I've stuck with the Wild Turkey, and it's with the ice cubes this time again because it moderates. That's a really the bite does not. I know Robert's been trying to get me to ice it up a little bit more, and I see the value of that because it stays longer. It doesn't hit and get.
Makes the flavor bloom.
It's not because that implies more, and it's not more. It's moderate.
I don't think it. To me, it doesn't imply more. It's just it's enhanced, more vivid, fuller.
Don't know that I'd say that, but for me anyway, it's more. It's smoother. There's no doubt about that. It stays longer. And it does. It's able to be nuanced better for me. Like I say, and it's everybody's timing is different. What are you drinking there, Robert?
I just got a little bit of the Woodford as well because just enough to have something in my glass to finish off while we talk here.
Cool.
Because it's always good. And of course, because I got so little of it, I did not put ice in it. So I'm actually having it neat this time.
Well, how
Yes,
about
here
that?
as well. Woodford neat.
Well, I'm stunned, gentlemen. You all, here I am, the one that goes away.
Well, since we poured so little, just
Yeah, if I
just
had
a
poured a
quick,
regular glass, I would have put
just a little
give
quick,
ice in it.
little quick snort. And the Woodford neat.
It's one of the few that doesn't really need it, but it does help it. But yeah, it's good even without it, because it's just top shelf stuff.
Amen. Yeah, it's still certainly one of the best. Wild Turkey is very, very good too. So let's wrap this up. Where are final thoughts that you guys have?
So what's, Francis? You're probably the biggest fan of the show between the three of us. It has other than just being long lasting, though. It does have a pretty important spot in television history.
It does.
Again, it's one of the first where cast changing doesn't kill the show.
It actually contributes to its longevity.
Yeah.
It's also the first that actually deals with war. There were military shows before, but you had Gomer Pyle, USMC, in the middle of the 60s, and the word Vietnam is never mentioned.
That's right. Or if you go back earlier to that, like combat and things like that, it's a glorification.
Yeah.
There's none. This is the horrors of war.
Well, now McHale's Navy showed some little bit of combat. It's very, very minimal. Phil Silver's show, that was set in the U.S.
Yeah.
Because that was, they're not Phil Silver's show, Sergeant Bilko. But it was called that. Because he had a show as well as that. And, there was never any that really showed it like this.
That's right. The horrors of war and the realities of war. And this is kind of a rhetorical question, but how much do you think Vietnam contributed to that?
Yeah, a lot.
Has to.
Because it's more than just that too. It's the the capriciousness of bureaucracy plays a role in MASH in a way it doesn't in other shows. Yeah. And I think that's very much that Vietnam came to be seen as this thing we can't stop. This it was a mistake to be involved, and now how do we get out? And when we can't get out, we have to keep going. It's trying to make a commentary about, is that point of view valid? That once you're there, you can't quit.
And when it also comments on war in general, because it's a very anti-war TV series in many ways.
Yeah,
right.
It's like, why are we doing this at all?
Yeah,
kind of comes across. That's kind of the subtext. One of the subtexts.
I think it's not so much that Vietnam influenced it as the fact that Vietnam was on everybody's TV screens every night.
Yeah,
and because of that, you couldn't do a McHale's Navy anymore because people had a sense of this war stuff is pretty crappy, and there's ramifications. There's bad stuff that has to be dealt with, and MASH dealt with that stuff.
It did,
along with a lot of other things. But it didn't. It wasn't all gore and anything. They didn't show battles, but they showed the after effect of them.
Because there's plenty of blood.
Yeah,
it's never gratuitous, but you see the surgeons are covered in blood from because almost every episode they have a surgery scene.
Yes,
it's a constant thread throughout there. Sometimes it's done for laughs, like with Charles Winchester touching his nose, and other times, and I never will forget this. One of my favorite lines that they're doing an interview piece, and they're talking to Father Mulcahy about what's moved you here, and he says, "Well, I'll never forget the time when it's very cold, and we're in tents, and the surgeons are operating, and they cut open a body. The surgeon will warm his hands over the heat that comes off, and he says, I defy anyone to see that and not be moved." That's kind of one of those moments, smack you in the middle of the nose, saying, "Wow, this is some powerful stuff."
Yeah, I remember that episode, the interview episode.
That they're talking about different things, and like I say, they could seamlessly switch back and forth between hilarious comedy.
Yes.
And
Sidney was in that episode.
Yeah,
because he talked about the people, about the characters, talking about how they dealt with things and how he admired them. Yeah. That was one of the best Sidney episodes, too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's so many really, those are fantastic. Another episode I didn't mention, but I do want to before we finish, is the Dream episode. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? Where they're in the middle. This is one of the later episodes where each character falls asleep and they have a dream. And it kind of exemplifies what they're going on with. And I don't remember all the different dreams, but I do remember...
I vaguely remember the episode.
Winchester had one of them. And he's doing all these magic tricks and people keep dying. And it's kind of like, I'm this great surgeon. What do you mean I can't fix you? And it's the beautiful symbolism that plays with that. There's very little actual dialogue in the episode. It's all physical moments. And each player, will fall asleep and they'll have a brief dream. And it's at the end of it, they talk about, well, maybe we should go get, now that it's over, let's go get some sleep. And Winchester says, to sleep, perchance to dream, from Hamlet. And everybody else says, maybe I'll go get another cup of coffee.
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
I remember that part. Yeah,
that was, it's one of those powerful, that one's in your face, serious moment.
Mm-hmm. Right,
and yet,
Father Mulcahy became one of the best characters on the show, in my opinion.
He did. He came to his ascendancy later. He filled in some voids when other folks left. But William Christopher, fantastic job. Fantastic job.
I think he was a great example. He played that mild-mannered priest extremely well. And again, as our great friend Marcus Aurelius says, priests on TV and priests in real life, they are not the same.
Father Mulcahy did have the ability to get his dander up.
Yes, he did. Yes.
Do you remember? And you might remember the episode when they spend all summer growing corn in there where they're at, so they can have corn on the cob to eat it, like back in the days. And Igor, the cook, creams it.
Yes.
And in Father Mulcahy, he just goes, "What the hell is this?" And he says, "Well, if that's the way you like it, you might as well just have it on the cob next time." That's one of those moments that. But you can kind of it was written so well and delivered so well, you can just sense that absolute angst.
A similar episode where they got fresh eggs.
Yes,
and the cook made scrambled eggs.
That's right, which they get powdered every day.
Yeah. So that was one of those. Which when you think about the kind of food that you get in the Army, anyways, any fresh food is heaven. And then to do stuff like that to it is just...
And you had various... they actually had only very few sets for this. You had the swamp, which was the tent where Hawkeye, BJ, and Winchester or Frank Burns were. You had the colonel's office. You had the operating room.
Yeah.
And you would have another tent necessarily if you needed it. And
you had Hot Lips tent. You had the shower.
That's right. I forgot the shower. The shower there. You had the dining room. The tent. The
mess tent.
The mess tent.
That's right. I forgot the shower.
That usually figured pretty prominently in the mess tent.
Yeah, it was a great episode where BJ and Hawkeye, they go on strike and they don't bathe.
One of my favorites, absolutely.
Yes. And so at one point, Hawkeye says, "Pardon my boarding house reach," and reaches across, and BJ gets a whiff of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and just practically passes out.
Nobody else will stick around, and finally they can't stand each other, and he goes, "Pardon me, pal, but you reek." And then Hot Lips, God bless her, takes everything matters at hand. She brings out the fire hose and scrubs them down.
Yes.
That's right. Wave 1. They go in and they hit it with the hose. Wave 2 comes in with the soap and takes care of all this problem.
And the big brushes to do the scrubbing and what have you. Yeah, just in a way, it's a lot like, as we talked about in our last episode, so many great moments in I Love Lucy. This is similar in the sense that even though they did run out of material for comedy and they started drifting into some more serious stuff, this cast, especially the second cast, as I said, I think of it almost as two different shows.
Yeah.
Was better suited for it.
Oh yeah.
And I think that the ability to do those helped it stay on television because it wasn't just slapstick for 11 years. Nobody can do slapstick for 11 years and stay on it's just not going to work.
That's right. And when they diversified the characters with a little bit, because if you think about it, Blake and Trapper and Hawkeye are all kind of the same guys.
Right, but that's what I was talking about. Trapper, BJ is very different from Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Charles is very different from both of them.
Yeah.
And, of course, Potter is the career Army guy.
That's correct.
And, of course, even, Radar and Klinger, the two company clerks, can't be any different. Mm-hmm. And, then, of course, you've got the career nurse in Margaret.
Yeah, who actually has a very nice character arc because she goes from being a big stick in the mud.
Yeah, she's a harridan at first.
Yeah, very much so, and a harpy at times.
Harpy, yes, even though she's has a hot and torrid thing going with Frank.
which totally I don't understand. Anyway, but that's just the way it works. And yet but she's also, and they said this in the movie, hot lips, you may be a pain in the ass, but you're a damn good nurse.
Yes.
And that's kind of what leads.
Interesting thing. You probably knew this, but one of the things that the actress
Loretta
Swit. Thank you. I had Swit. I couldn't think of the first name. One of the things she hated about playing Hot Lips was that she had to gain weight because women in the 50s the ideal was a little bit heftier than they were in the 70s.
Yeah.
Remember, 70s is the era of Twiggy.
Yeah,
that's right. Yes.
So she actually had to put on a little bit of weight to fill out for the era of her character.
Be a little curvy and voluptuous.
Yeah. Which, it's like, my God, what did you look like before you had to put on a little bit of weight? Mm-hmm. It was only like 10 pounds, but on 10 pounds on a woman who is really in good shape that's a lot.
Yeah. She actually met her husband, believe it or not, in one of the later episodes of MASH. He was the guy, the foreign guy that came in as an ambassador, and they have a little affair on the.
Oh yeah.
Well, that actually becomes her husband. She meets him, and they get married, and they, I believe, are still married to this day.
Yeah, you can tell she was a career nurse because practically every guy who came in, she knew and had a relationship at one time.
Well, I mean,
there was Scully, the lieutenant who got busted down to a sergeant, and they had a relationship.
Well, General Hammond, the very first episode, he talks about Major Houlihan. Yeah, okay, I'm coming.
But all the characters had growth. Although I don't know that Hawkeye really did.
That's a good. Well, he became more serious. Horn dog. Yeah, there's some truth to that.
But that's about it. I mean, Margaret has much more of an arc. BJ doesn't really have much of one, other than he does have an infidelity.
Great episode, actually. He has,
but he doesn't really change a whole lot. Charles matures and has
very
a
much
great
so because
character
he's just an arrogant ass.
Yes,
when he comes in, and
even Potter has a bit of a decent arc, not a huge, because he's a career Army guy.
Yeah.
He's going to be career Army at the start and at the end, but he becomes far more human and likable.
Heart of gold is what he comes up with. He's a good.
He becomes
commander.
more of the grandpa that he looks like.
Yeah, and is still a good commander.
Yeah. And of course Klinger, he matures from the trying to get out on a Section 8 to occasionally wearing an actual uniform.
Yeah,
yeah. In the later seasons, they throw away all that, all the rest of that, and they
use other ways to have comedy for the character. Than
right. His shtick a lot of it became Toledo, where he was from. Which I love.
And kind of as a scavenger, the guy that's getting stuff for the unit.
Yeah, which the Kirby clerks would often do that. Yeah. In fact, that was his dream, was going back to Toledo.
Yes, that's what he talked about. And then, of course, the irony of him staying.
That's right.
But he ended up not going back to Toledo because he ended up at the same hospital with Potter and there was a third person from the show in the second. In the follow-up.
Mulcahy was there.
Yes, they all ended up in the same place, but it was like in Missouri where Potter was from.
Right, yes. So
why he was not in Toledo, other than the fact that, the show was set here.
Yes. They actually did a pilot. I did see it, because it did air, called Radar. With Gary Berghoff as Radar back home. I don't think he's in Ottumwa, Iowa. He's in another. He becomes a beat policeman, but it's kind of comedy. It just didn't. I watched it because I said, okay, let's see what this is, because I'm a big MASH fan.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
It was just aired once.
Of course, now there was the other spinoff, Trapper John M.D.
That's correct, which most people don't realize that because I want to say
because it was set in modern times, so it was Trapper 20 years later.
Right, but it was serious. It was Pernell Roberts. Was another medical show.
Yes, it was another medical. It was really one of the first modern of the medical shows.
That's true. I'm glad you mentioned that. Maybe we should do something on those. That would be kind of fun.
Yeah, maybe.
Because that's a very good.
Well, we are running out of pop culture ideas. We may have to.
Medical shows can be a real drag because you're talking about preachy stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Holy cow!
And
can be, yeah,
and formulaic. They're very formulaic.
It doesn't take a lot for something like Grey's Anatomy to jump the shark.
Oh, that's another episode for another day, gentlemen. We need to wind this bad boy down. Any final thoughts? Here we are at an hour.
You're the captain, man. Take us out.
All right, good. We're going back to history next time. we're going to go back to World War I, believe it or not. I know, Robert, it's been a while, so you shouldn't be upset.
I'm okay with that because, we spent like the first year doing World War I. So.
We're doing this will be the third of our mini-series on important treaties that shaped the world. And this is kind of the big one. This is the Treaty of Versailles, that took place at the end of World War I. And
this is the big dog of
this is
world-shaping
events. And we're going to talk about that.
In an attempt to make sense of a destroyed world.
Exactly. And where they went and how that informs us today. So be here, folks.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.